Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a stack of notes today that honestly kept me up late last night.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy one today.
It really is. Usually we look at something tangible, like the supply chain of lithium or the history of a sourdough starter. But today we are looking at the invisible operating system that runs basically everything around you.
Right, it's a fundamental shift in perspective. We're zooming out to look at the architecture of society itself.
Specifically, the law. Capital T, capital L. And I want to start with a bit of a vibe check for you listening. When you picture the law, what is the image that pops into your head? Because for me, it's wood paneling, it's heavy leather-bound books.
A judge sitting up high in a road.
Exactly. And there's this feeling of absolute solidity to it. Like you walk into a courthouse and you feel like you are entering a machine.
A logic machine.
Yeah.
That is the standard model most of us carry around in our heads.
Right. We have this built-in assumption that the legal system is essentially a giant calculator. You take a set of facts, let's call it input A, and you feed them into the hopper. The gears turn, the statutes interlock like clockwork, and out comes a predictable result, a verdict.
We assume that X plus Y always equals Z.
Yes, that if I do this, the result is definitively that. We view it as codified reason.
Right, we think that if we just read the rule book, we'll know exactly how the game is played.
But today's source material, which is a text titled Discretion.txt, basically takes that assumption, throws it on the ground, and sets it on fire.
It really does not pull any punches.
Not at all. It argues that this logic machine concept is a complete myth. And the quote that really stuck with me, I think I highlighted it 3 times, is this. The source says what we call law is actually institutionalized discretion wrapped in the aesthetics of rules.
Institutionalized discretion wrapped in the aesthetics of rules. It's a striking phrase.
It sounds like a magic trick. Or a costume.
Costume is exactly the metaphor the source uses. It argues that the legal system is wearing the costume of logic. It dresses up the robes, it uses the Latin phrases, it cites, subsection B of subsection 4.
Looks the part.
Right, it looks the part. But if you strip all that away, underneath, it isn't math, it isn't algorithm, it is just people.
Just people making choices.
Exactly. People with authority, deciding what they want the outcome to be, and then using the rules to justify it. And we should be clear for everyone listening, the source isn't just talking about a specific area of law, like crypto regulation or criminal justice.
Right. It's talking about the deep logical architecture of the entire system itself.
The whole foundation.
So let's unpack this a bit, because the word discretion is one of those soft words, right? It sounds polite, like viewer discretion is advised, but in this context, it feels a lot heavier.
It's the core of the whole argument. To understand discretion, you have to understand its opposite. The source asks us to imagine a true logical system. Think about computer code, or say, a very simple thermostat.
Okay, I'm picturing a thermostat.
If you program a thermostat, you use what we call bright lines, clear, unambiguous thresholds. If the temperature hits 72 degrees, turn on the AC. It's binary. It's algorithmic.
The thermostat doesn't sit there and negotiate with itself.
No, it doesn't think, well, it says 72, but it's a dry heat today, and the homeowner looks a bit chilly, so maybe I'll wait until 74.
Right. It doesn't care about context or feelings. It just executes.
That is logic. That is a bright line. And the source argues that for a system to be truly logical, it needs a few very specific things. First, an algorithmic decision procedure. Second, unambiguous thresholds. And third, and this is key, it cannot allow contradictory norms to overlap.
And the argument is that our legal system fails that logic checklist.
It fails it on almost every single level. The legal system has no strict algorithmic procedure. It relies entirely on human interpretation. And perhaps most importantly, it is completely full of contradictory norms.
Give me an example of that.
Well, you have statutes that say one thing, historical precedents that say another, and then local enforcement policies that say a third thing.
Oh, I see. It's like having a thermostat that's programmed to just keep the room comfortable.
Exactly.
But comfortable is totally subjective. What does that even mean? Who decides?
Precisely. If the rule is keep the room comfortable, then the thermostat isn't a machine anymore. It's a decision maker. It has discretion. And in the legal system, that decision maker is a judge, a prosecutor, or a regulator. They decide which rule applies. They decide which precedent matters on any given day.
Man, this is where that costume idea really hits home for me. Because we use all these fancy structured words, due process, statutory interpretation, jurisprudence. It looks incredibly organized.
It looks like geometry.
Yes, exactly, like
What
geometry.
about those bright lines without clear, objective boundaries, there is no geometry. There is only authority. The source is very blunt about this. It states that without bright lines, there is no logic. There is only a group of people deciding when to apply which rule.
It's a little unnerving, honestly, because we take so much comfort in the idea of the law being logical. You want to believe that if you just follow the rules, you are safe.
But if the rules are blurry,
Yeah, if the speed limit isn't 65, but rather drive safely.
then safety isn't about following the rules. Safety is about not upsetting the person interpreting the rules.
Which is a terrifying pivot. But I want to push back on this a little bit, or at least play devil's advocate for a second, because I can hear the standard defense screaming in my ear right now.
I think you know which one you mean.
The messy world defense. The idea that we can't have bright, clear lines for everything because life is just too complicated. If we make the rules too specific, people will just find loopholes. They will game the system.
Right, the classic anti-gaming justification.
Yeah. Like if the law says don't steal over $1,000, someone will steal $999 and say, hey, I'm innocent. We need the flexibility to catch the bad guys who are trying to skirt the technicalities.
That is probably the most common argument for why laws are vague. We need flexibility to prevent people from gaming the system.
And it sounds totally reasonable. I don't want people gaming the system.
But here is where the source drops a massive aha moment.
Yeah.
It calls this argument a rhetorical shield.
A rhetorical shield.
Yes. It argues that refusing to define bright lines isn't some tragic necessity born of a messy world. It is a deliberate political choice. And it introduces this concept of the symmetry of power.
I loved this section. The symmetry of power. It sounds like a physics theory.
It's a game theory concept, really. Imagine a seesaw. On one side, you have the citizen. On the other side, you have the state. The force argues there is an unavoidable trade-off here.
Okay, walk me through the trade-off.
If you do have bright lines, clear, rigid rules like do not drive faster than 65 miles per hour, then yes, citizens can game them. They can drive 64.9 miles per hour.
They can find the exact edge of the cliff and stand right on it.
Precisely. They know exactly where the line is, so they know they are safe right up to that millimeter.
Okay, so that's the loophole fear. The citizen uses the clarity to get away with as much as possible.
Exactly. But flip the switch. If you don't have bright lines, if the laws are vague, open to interpretation based on reasonableness or discretion, then who games the system?
The state.
Yes. The state gets to exploit the ambiguity. The state gets to decide, after the fact, that what you did was illegal, even if it wasn't clearly written down beforehand. So the question isn't, how do we stop gaming? The question is, who gets to game the system?
That completely reframes it, because usually when we hear politicians or regulators talk about closing loopholes or needing flexibility, we nod along thinking they're just protecting justice.
But the source is saying they're actually just hoarding leverage.
Hoarding leverage, it creates a huge power asymmetry. Think about starting a business in a heavily regulated industry. If the rules are crystal clear, you can build your business around them. You know exactly what you can and can't do.
You are in control of your own compliance.
Right. I can hire a lawyer, they read the code, and they say, go ahead.
But if the rules are vague, if the rule is don't engage in unfair practices, and unfair is never strictly defined, then you are entirely at the mercy of the regulator.
You have to ask for permission for everything.
You do. You have to hope they don't change their minds in 3 years. The power shifts entirely to the enforcer.
It reminds me of that old saying, I think it's attributed to Lavrenti Beria, the head of Stalin's secret police. Show me the man and I'll show you the crime.
That is the ultimate endpoint of a system without bright lines. If the laws are broad enough, everyone is technically guilty of something. It just depends on whether the authority decides to enforce it against you specifically.
So we're essentially trading predictability for state leverage. We willingly give up knowing the exact rules so that the state has the power to smack anyone down if they get too cute.
That is the deal on the table.
Yeah.
And most people don't even realize that trade was made. They just think the law is naturally complicated.
Speaking of complicated, let's talk about open texture. I saw this term in the notes. HLA heart. It sounds like we're discussing fabric or doing a wine tasting. You know, this law has a lovely open texture with notes of oak.
It does sound completely harmless. But HLA Hart was a giant in legal philosophy. His argument was that human language is inherently fuzzy. You simply can't write a rule that covers every possible future scenario.
Which, to be fair, makes a lot of sense. Like, if I write a law saying no vehicles in the park, I'm obviously thinking of cars and trucks.
Right.
But then what about a bicycle? What about a skateboard? A motorized wheelchair? What about a drone flying over the park?
Exactly. Hart would say that because language has this open texture, the law must be vague to be flexible. We need the judge to look at the drone and say, does this count as a vehicle in the spirit of the law?
And that seems like a good thing. We want common sense applied. We
Right.
don't want a grandmother on a mobility scooter getting arrested because of a strict technicality.
We absolutely want that human element. But the source asks a critical question here. What is the actual cost of that flexibility?
And what's the answer?
The cost is the complete loss of algorithmic determinacy. The cost is that there is no objective resolution procedure anymore. If the law is open-textured, it means there is zero guarantee of equal treatment.
Because one judge might say the drone is totally fine, but a different judge might confiscate it and fine you.
Precisely. Your innocence depends entirely on who is sitting on the bench that day.
So it's subjective.
Highly subjective. And the source makes a very strong, very clear distinction here. It says that when you have a group of people with authority deciding when to apply which rule, that is not the definition of logic. That is the definition of governance.
Governance. That's a crucial distinction. Logic is a system. Governance is a behavior.
Yes, logic is independent of the person running it. Governance is entirely dependent on the person running it.
Conflating the two is dangerous.
Very dangerous. Because it tricks us into thinking that governance decisions, which are political choices, are actually logical necessities.
It's like we're being gaslit by a system itself, like the judge saying, oh, this isn't me deciding to punish you, this is just the law.
Exactly. My hands are tied.
Right.
But in a discretionary system, their hands are never actually tied. They're actively choosing where to put their hands.
Now, I have to bring up something I found in the notes that genuinely made my brain hurt a little bit. Paraconsistent logic.
Oh, yes.
The source mentions that legal theorists use this term to defend the messiness of the law. I tried to look this up, and I ended up in a massive rabbit hole of symbolic logic.
It is an incredibly dense academic topic.
The basic idea, as I understood it, is that in normal classical logic, if you have a contradiction, like if A is true and not A is also true, the whole system explodes. It becomes impossible.
That's a great summary. In classical logic, a contradiction entails everything. If the sky is blue and the sky is not blue are both treated as true statements, then you can mathematically prove that unicorns exist. The logic breaks entirely.
Right. But paraconsistent logic is a way of handling those contradictions without the whole system crashing down.
Yes. It's a formal mathematical system designed specifically to contain that explosion so you can keep calculating.
So legal theorists say, hey, look, the law isn't a mess. It's just using paraconsistent logic. It's highly sophisticated.
Right. They use the terminology as a shield. They say, we aren't incoherent. We're simply operating in a complex paraconsistent framework. But the source absolutely destroys this defense.
It calls it intellectual vaporware.
Vaporware. Because while the law definitely has contradictions,
Tons of them, right?
real paraconsistent logic has strict rules. It has formal inference procedures. It handles contradictions systematically and mathematically.
And the legal system doesn't do that at all.
Not even close. The legal system just has a giant pile of contradictory statutes and essentially says, Judge, you figure it out.
It's not a formal system handling contradiction. It's just a mess.
It is a mess. And then a judge just picks a winner. The source calls that post hoc rationalization.
Meaning you decide what you want first.
Exactly. You decide, I want this guy to go to jail. And then you look back through the massive pile of contradictory rules to find the one specific thread that justifies it.
That's not logic. That's shopping.
It's window shopping for a verdict. And this leads to what I think is the most biting analogy in the entire text. It compares the phrase, the logic of the law, to the name of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
I laughed out loud when I read that part. It's savage.
It really is. But think about it.
Yeah.
The DPRK North Korea isn't democratic.
No.
It's not for the people. And it is barely a republic. But the name heavily suggests it is all of those things.
It's aspirational branding.
It's pure propaganda. And the source argues that calling our legal system logical does the exact same thing. It is aspirational propaganda, not a description of reality.
We call it logical because we desperately want it to be logical. We want to believe that justice is a calculation, not just a contest of wills between powerful people.
Exactly.
So this brings us to the big question. If the current system is a discretionary mess wearing a really good logical costume, does it have to be this way?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right. Is the messiness of the real world just too much for a bright line system? Or is this actually fixable?
The source asks, can we fix it? And the answer it gives is surprisingly technical. It says, yes.
Wait, we could actually build a law machine.
According to the source, a fully algorithmic, deterministic, consistent legal code could be built today. We have the technology. We have the formal logic. It is not practically impossible to write laws that have clear, binary thresholds for almost everything.
So if it's possible, why don't we do it? Why are we stuck with the open texture and the costumes?
Because of the consequences. Think about what happens if you actually flip that switch. If the law becomes a literal machine input facts, output verdict, what happens to the judge?
They just become a mechanic. They watch the machine run. They lose their power entirely.
Exactly. The state loses its discretionary power.
And what about the citizens?
Citizens gain total predictability. You would know with 100% certainty before you acted whether an action was legal or illegal. There would be no guessing. No gray areas. No needing to hire a firm to interpret the mood of a regulator.
That sounds amazing, honestly. I mean, imagine doing your taxes and knowing for a hard fact that you were correct, and no audit could ever change that interpretation.
It does sound amazing. But consider the other side of that coin. Enforcement becomes completely mechanical. If you cross the bright line by 1 inch, the penalty applies. No mercy.
Oh.
If the speed limit is 65 and the sensor clocks you at 66, you get the ticket instantly. No talking your way out of it. No saying, "Officer, I was rushing my wife to the hospital."
The machine doesn't care about your story.
It only cares about the input. 66 is greater than 65. Penalty applied.
And perhaps more significantly for the people actually in charge, selective prosecution becomes impossible.
Bingo. The state cannot choose to go after you, but ignore your neighbor who did the exact same thing, because the machine doesn't care who you are or who you know. It creates a perfectly level playing field.
And historically, people in power do not like level playing fields.
They absolutely detest them. That is the conclusion the source draws. These bright line systems aren't rare because they're hard to build. They are rare because they are profoundly undesirable to those in power.
Undesirable to those in power. That really drives it home. The incoherence isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature.
It is the architecture. The vagueness is what allows the authority to function as authority. If the law was truly logical, the logic would rule, not the people. And people in power generally prefer to rule.
Man, this has been a pretty intense deep dive. We started out by thinking the law was this majestic edifice of pure reason, and we've ended up seeing it as a tool for authority maintained through deliberately vague definitions just to preserve state power.
It's a very sobering realization. We went from law as logic to law as governance. And we saw that the main justification for the vagueness stopping regular people from gaming the system is actually just a way for the state to ensure it is the one doing the gaming.
It's going to completely reframe how you look at every headline, every Supreme Court case, every new regulation. You stop looking for the logic and you start looking for the leverage.
That is the key takeaway for anyone listening. Don't ask, does this rule make sense logically? Ask, who does this ambiguity serve?
Before we wrap up, though, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on, because as much as I hate the idea of the state gaming the system, the alternative scares me a little too. The source ends with this very provocative proposition about flipping the switch.
It raises a profound question about what we actually value as humans.
Right, because if we had that robot judge, that perfect law machine, sure, we get absolute predictability. But do we really want a world without mercy?
Think about that moment when you get pulled over. You see the flashing lights in the mirror, your heart sinks, the officer comes up to the window. In a strict, bright line world, he hands you the ticket and walks away. There is zero conversation.
But in our messy, discretionary world, you can say, "I'm so sorry, officer, I didn't realize the speed dropped," or "I'm having a terrible day." And sometimes, not always, but sometimes he lets you go with a warning.
That warning is discretion. That is the system failing to be logical in your favor.
So maybe we actually rely on that logical flaw more than we admit. We hate it when the state uses ambiguity to crush us, but we love it when the state uses ambiguity to save us.
It's the ultimate paradox. We crave the rule of law in the abstract, but we often crave the rule of man when we are the ones sitting in the defendant's chair. We want the judge to see us as a human being, not just a data input.
Maybe we hate the costume of logic, but we're secretly addicted to the flawed human underneath it.
And that might be the real reason why the system never changes. not just because the powerful want to keep power, but because deep down the rest of us are afraid of the cold, hard logic of a machine that literally cannot forgive.
That is a lot to process. I'm going to be thinking about that the next time I see one of those speed limits enforced by aircraft signs on the highway.
Just keep it under 65 and you won't have to worry about the philosophy.
Sound advice. Thank you so much for walking us through this architecture of discretion. And thank you to everyone listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.